On a quiet morning in Louisiana, amidst hundreds of families gathered for a graduation ceremony, no one anticipated a moment that would render the entire auditorium silent. Two security guards, dressed in crisp uniforms, slowly approached a woman sitting alone in the front row. She wore a dark green military uniform, sat upright, her gaze fixed on the stage. She wasn't loud, carried no name tag or introduction. Yet her quiet presence drew many eyes. "Excuse me, this area is reserved for families of outstanding students," one guard said stiffly. The woman didn't look up, calmly replying, "I know. I'm here for my son." Who was she? Why was she being questioned? In a society that seemingly had moved beyond prejudice, the image of a black woman in uniform became a target of suspicion, even on the day her son was being honored. As the conversation grew tense and the crowd's curiosity turned to scrutiny, something unexpected happened. From various rows, 10 men stood up simultaneously. They said nothing, showed no emotion, but walked towards her with synchronized steps, like an impenetrable wall. They were SEALs who had faced life and death. No one understood what was happening. But from that moment, the auditorium was no longer just a graduation venue. It became a place witnessing a greater truth through silence and dignity. Some people, even without a welcome, deserve deep respect. And that woman, none other than the mother of the ceremony's top student. Her name was Elizabeth Stones, a former SEAL who had served in some of the world's most brutal battlefields, a combat nurse who fought not just physical wounds, but also the despair on the front lines. 20 years in the military, she didn't just stop bleeding amidst gunfire, but also held the hands of soldiers taking their last breaths. But today, she wasn't donning her armor for the country, but for her son, Pascal Stones, valedictorian, the school's top achiever, National Science Award winner, and the pride of all teachers. But to Elizabeth, he wasn't just an outstanding student. He was the child she missed hundreds of nap-time hugs with, birthday parties she couldn't attend, and tearful video calls at night. She came not for recognition, not to be introduced as a hero. She came because of a silent promise to herself. No matter how chaotic the world, no matter how many missions called, she wouldn't miss today. The day Pascal stepped onto the stage, not just to receive an award, but to see his mother there, in the front row, proud and composed. The dark green uniform Elizabeth wore wasn't to assert power. It symbolized all she'd been through and was the only way she wanted to appear before her son. An imperfect mother who never faltered. Elizabeth sat quietly in the front row, the VIP section reserved for families of outstanding students. The ticket she held was valid, issued by the school, bearing her son's name, Pascal Stones. But despite all procedures being correct, the eyes around her were filled with doubt. They didn't ask directly, but whispers pierced the air. Isn't she just a nurse? Why is she in the honor section? Maybe she sneaked in. She heard it all, but didn't react. For someone who had faced gunfire at night, feared being forgotten on the battlefield, there was no need to justify her presence. Then, 2 security guards approached. One held a clipboard, the other wore sunglasses indoors. They didn't greet, didn't inquire. They just stood there, head slightly bowed, speaking coldly. "Ma'am, this area isn't for you." Elizabeth looked straight ahead. "I know. I have a ticket." She presented it with a calm voice, as she'd done countless times during military security checks. The guard glanced at the ticket, frowned. "This ticket doesn't look like regular family tickets." She wasn't angry, nor shaken, just clarified. "This is a VIP family ticket. I'm Pascal Stone's mother." Silence lingered for a few seconds. Then the second guard, with a more sarcastic tone, asked, "You're his mother?" No further words were needed. His eyes conveyed the rest. A black woman in uniform couldn't possibly be the mother of the top student. Elizabeth maintained her calm tone. "I'm not here to impress. I'm here for my son." But that answer wasn't enough. And in the moment she was asked to leave, when 2 decades of service were dismissed by a narrow view, a silent storm began to rise. What seemed like a minor confrontation between a woman and 2 security guards suddenly became heavy. The auditorium's atmosphere froze. Phones quietly began recording. All eyes focused on Elizabeth Stones, the mother being asked to leave a seat she rightfully occupied. Then, the unexpected happened. A chair creaked. A man stood up from the row behind. Then another, then a third, up to the 10th. No one spoke. No commands were given, yet they simultaneously left their seats. From the stands, side aisles, corners among the crowd. They approached Elizabeth with firm, synchronized steps, as if rehearsed their entire lives for this exact moment. No weapons, no medals on their chests, just the eyes and demeanor of those who had faced death. They were soldiers, Navy SEALs who had lain on battlefield stretchers with wounds no one dared touch, except one person, her, Sergeant Ortiz, whom Elizabeth revived just minutes before his heart stopped. Lieutenant Marsh, whose artery she clamped amidst gunfire to keep him alive. Private Walker, whom she once bandaged with bare hands while the flames of war still burned on his armor. They needed no introductions, no assertions of identity. They didn't come to cause a scene. They came to remind the room that the woman being questioned was the reason they stood there today. As they stood behind Elizabeth Stones, like a silent wall, the room became eerily quiet. The 2 guards froze. One lowered his radio, saying nothing. The other stepped back half a pace. Elizabeth remained seated, hands on her lap, her voice gentle as the wind. "Do you still need me to leave?" No one answered. Because everything was clear. Not through shouting, not through action, just through presence. And the one thing undeniable: credibility built over a lifetime of sacrifice. As applause erupted throughout the auditorium, the principal's voice echoed through the speakers. "And now, please welcome the valedictorian, top student, National Science Award winner, and state track athlete, Pascal Stones." Cheers, whistles, and waving bouquets filled the space. But amidst the cacophony, a distinct rhythm emerged. The 10 soldiers behind Elizabeth began clapping. Slowly, decisively, in unison, like marching boots, like drums of honor in a silent battlefield. The entire hall paused. Sporadic cheers began aligning with their rhythm, a subconscious agreement that this moment wasn't just for an outstanding student, it was for something greater. From behind the stage curtain, Pascal emerged. In a black graduation gown, a golden honor cord draped over his shoulder, he walked steadily, unhurried. Each step weighted with years, missed moments with his mother during special occasions, nights of self-study, growing up silently. He didn't look at the crowd, nor at the cameras. He looked at one person, Elizabeth Stones. His mother sitting upright in the front row, eyes fixed on him, hands on her lap, with soldiers standing solemnly behind her like a living honor guard. When their eyes met, no nod, no wave, just a prolonged, silent gaze. Pascal paused, bowed, slowly, deeply, with all the reverence words couldn't express. That bow wasn't for the stage, not for the diploma, but for the one who sacrificed everything, silently, steadfastly, so he could stand there today. A wordless thank you, yet everyone felt it. The ceremony ended. People began leaving the auditorium, carrying laughter, congratulations, sparkling bouquets, and flashing cameras. The schoolyard buzzed with joy, parents taking photos with their children, students cheering, tossing caps into the air. but in a distant corner under an old oak tree, where the evening sun filtered through the leaves, a completely different silence prevailed. Elizabeth Stones stood there, silent like an unnamed monument, her dark green uniform still crisp, but on her left chest, where her heart beat, was a simple badge. Not as shiny as a medal, but symbolizing a lifetime of service. She didn't push through the crowd, didn't seek anyone, just stood waiting, like she had waited for flights home from battlefields, like those times standing in field hospitals, believing those who needed her would find her. Then Pascal approached. No more cheers around them, no more camera flashes, just the gentle breeze fluttering his graduation gown. He stopped before his mother, said nothing, didn't ask, needed no explanation. He just stepped forward, embraced her. Not a polite hug, not a formality, but the embrace of a son who had just touched the deepest truth in his heart. That everything he had today didn't come from luck, but from sleepless nights, missed moments, silent sacrifices no one mentioned. Elizabeth said nothing, just gently held her son, like she once held wounded soldiers, just enough to preserve life, just enough to instill faith. In that moment, amidst the early summer cicadas and the setting sun, Pascal was no longer a recent graduate. He was a man, truly understanding who his mother was. That evening, the small house in suburban Louisiana was unusually quiet. No more loudspeakers, no more applause, just the soft yellow light from a corner lamp casting shadows on the old wooden floor, reflecting the silhouettes of mother and son sitting opposite each other. Elizabeth had changed out of her uniform. She wore a light gray sweater, her hair still damp from a shower, sitting upright on a worn sofa. Before her was an old photo album, its spine peeling, pages worn from years. Pascal sat on the floor, still in his graduation gown, its hem draped like a newly knighted cloak. He turned each page, eyes fixed on the faded black and white photos. There was a photo of his mother, holding a flashlight in the night forest, the light in her mouth as her hands compressed a soldier's chest. Another showed her sitting beside a sand-covered helicopter, her face calm despite the battlefield backdrop. Pascal whispered, "Never showed me these." Early the next morning, while the Louisiana sky was still soaked in dew and the first rays of sunlight barely peeked through the branches of the old oak tree, Elizabeth Stones stood on her porch. A cup of coffee in hand, her posture was straight as if she were still in uniform, her gaze distant, not waiting for anything in particular, but simply accustomed to the stillness after every storm. No medals adorned her chest. No name tag hung from her collar. Only the soft morning light and a woman who no longer needed to prove anything to the world. Then came a familiar sound, the slow crunch of tires rolling over the old gravel path. A black SUV emerged through the trees. No sirens, no fanfare, just presence. The door opened, then another, and another, until 10 doors had opened. 10 men stepped out. No uniforms, no insignias, just plain shirts, jeans, and boots dusted with mud. But their eyes, those eyes, held the weight of memories. Of lives that had once hung by a thread, sustained only by the hands they would never forget. They said nothing. They didn't need to. They stepped onto the porch, forming a line. 10 men, 10 stories, 10 resurrections. Then, as if guided by a rhythm printed in blood, they raised their hands in a salute. Simultaneously, no trumpets, no commands, just a salute from former soldiers to the woman they had always seen as their silent commander. Elizabeth placed her coffee cup gently on the railing, then returned the salute, her arm rising slowly but firmly, not out of protocol, but out of gratitude. After a few sacred seconds, one of them, a man with silver at his temples, stepped forward. No need for introductions. His eyes met Elizabeth's like two warriors who had once stood shoulder to shoulder in foreign dust. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, holding it out with both hands. From all of us. The handwritten note still rested in Elizabeth's hand. The black-inked words trembled gently in the breeze. You didn't save our lives. You shaped them. She folded it, tucked it inside her shirt, near her heart, and stood for a moment longer beneath the rising sun. But instead of returning indoors, Elizabeth walked straight to a wooden chest sitting in the hallway, a long-forgotten trunk. She opened the lid. Inside were all the things she had hidden away for 2 decades: medals, decorations, a blood-stained piece of torn fabric, name tags of fallen soldiers, and at the very top, a folded triangle flag, the one her husband had carried when he left for war and never returned. Pascal stepped out from the house. He stood still, saying nothing, as he watched his mother quietly select 3 items and place them in a smaller wooden box: her nurse's insignia, her own name tag, and the handwritten letter from the soldiers. Then she closed the lid. Pascal asked softly, "What are you doing, Mom?" Elizabeth didn't look at him. She simply replied, "I've kept this legacy too long. It's time the world knows that it didn't come from medals, but from standing still when the world told you to back away." The next morning, local news reported, a small wooden box, no label, no lock, had been left at the front steps of City Hall. Inside were only 3 items and a line carved into the lid with a knife. Real strength doesn't shout, it stands. And sometimes it kneels, so others can rise. People came, reporters swarmed, veterans bowed their heads before the box like it was an invisible monument. No one knew who had placed it there. But to the thousands who heard the story, Elizabeth Stones was no longer just a mother, a nurse, or a veteran.